To make it short, in a way, this is going to be my last Monza race I'm going to do. At the end of this year, I've decided together with the team that I'm going to retire from racing.
Okay, pause it right there. Now, let's rewind the clock and imagine that Schumacher doesn't retire. Let's imagine he signs a 1-year send-off contract for 2007 and comes back to fight with Fernando Alonso, Kimi Räikkönen, and Lewis Hamilton. It's a tantalizing prospect. So, what if Michael Schumacher had stayed in Formula 1 beyond 2006 and was part of the 2007 season? The first thing we have to figure out is the potential driver lineups that could have been possible for 2007. Now, there are actually multiple driver combinations for both teams, and here is the 3 that I think are all vaguely realistic. The first option is for Ferrari to keep their 2006 lineup of Schumacher and Massa, but for McLaren to also hang on to Kimi Räikkönen, whilst also bringing in Fernando Alonso. However, this means of course that we don't get to see a rookie Lewis Hamilton in a race-winning McLaren, and whilst I'm sure that Ron Dennis would have still got Lewis into another team to make his F1 debut, it's not as enticing as seeing a rookie Lewis and a 7-time champion Michael fighting in fairly equal cars. The second option is once again Schumacher partnering Massa at Ferrari, but this time McLaren keep Kimi so they have their star man, but still bring in a rookie Hamilton to make his F1 debut at McLaren. In this scenario, we sadly don't get Alonso in a front-running car because by then Renault went from winning the Constructors' title in 2006 to finishing down in 4th in 2007 if you take the real-life McLaren disqualification out of it, which means Alonso would be relegated to the midfield. However, the really interesting thing about this scenario is that once Schumacher would complete his final 2007 season and retire, undoubtedly Ferrari would go straight for Alonso as his replacement, and we would get Fernando Alonso in that 2008 Ferrari which Massa took to the title decider. Now, this is technically an alternative universe within an alternative universe, but I really do wonder what Alonso could have done in that 2008 Ferrari. However, whilst all of those scenarios are great, they're not the ones that I'm going to be using for this video. Quite honestly, if either of those two were the lineups for 2007, I'd be very confident to say that Schumacher would be the 2007 champion. So instead, I'm going to be going for a more exciting and actually more realistic scenario of Schumacher and a brand new Räikkönen at Ferrari, and still both brand new Alonso and rookie Hamilton at McLaren for this hypothetical 2007 season. But let me first explain why I think that genuinely this is the most realistic option. When it comes to Fernando Alonso, it's widely known that he already had a contract with McLaren for 2007 at the end of 2005 when he won his first World Championship, and that's why I've got no doubt that he still would have been there. What's more interesting though is why did Alonso and Ron Dennis sign a contract for 2007 well over a year in advance? The reason for that was the doubt around the future of Kimi Räikkönen at McLaren. At the time, Kimi's teammate was Juan Pablo Montoya. Montoya and McLaren was a horrible fit in every way imaginable, but that's why Ron Dennis signed Alonso so early. He knew that he needed a reliable superstar that could get the best out of the car in case Kimi left. And Alonso himself wanted to join McLaren because, although he had just won the first of his 2 titles with Renault, he also knew that Renault could never match the level of money and resources that McLaren had. Now, the reason why Ferrari wanted to sign Kimi was firstly because Kimi was one of the absolute quickest drivers on the grid, and then secondly because the Ferrari president Luca de Montezemolo started to plan for the team's future beyond Michael Schumacher. Now, what happened in the real world is that when Ferrari were talking to Kimi in 2005 about coming to the team in 2007, although Schumacher then went on to fight for the title against Alonso in 2006, he was kind of pushed into retirement and out of the team. Now again, in reality, this kind of worked out for both sides because Ferrari got to look forward to their brand new era with Kimi, and Schumacher, at least in the public eye, got to look like he left on his own terms and got the legendary send-off that he deserved. This is the part where we do need to twist reality just a little bit and imagine that Ferrari still want to bring Kimi as the team's future, but also accept that Michael wants to do another season and that somehow everyone would be happy with this. In a strange way, we can almost compare this to where Mercedes are right now in 2022, with Lewis still being able to win championships, but with Toto wanting to also bring in George Russell as the team's future. Now, this is not the Ferrari way by any stretch of the imagination, having two #1 drivers, and especially in this era. And it also means that they would have had to tear up Massa's 2007 contract, but let's be honest, that wouldn't exactly be too hard for a team like Ferrari. So, for this universe, for 2007, Ferrari officially signed Kimi Räikkönen, as well as retain Michael Schumacher for one more season. So, let's begin the 2007 season. Now, for this, I'm not going to try and predict what would happen race by race because that would be impossibly difficult. Instead, I'm going to do it in kind of sections. So, let's begin with the first 7 or so races. There's no doubt in my mind that during the early part of the season, Michael would have had an advantage over Kimi. The team was still very much built around him, and even in real life, although Kimi did win the first race, the early part of the season was actually a struggle for him as he got used to the car, but more significantly, the Bridgestone tyres. Now, back in 05 and 06, F1 had two tyre suppliers in Michelin and Bridgestone. Now, the tyres back then were absolutely pivotal to the characteristics of the car, and more importantly, how a driver needed to drive to get the most performance out of it. Now, obviously we see this even now with the modern day Pirellis where conservation is key, but back then it was a little bit different. You had to drive a certain way depending on which tyre you had, and you genuinely could not use the same driving style if you switched between the two tyres on an identical car. The problem was that Ferrari were the only top team to use the Bridgestone tyre, the only other teams were backmarkers, and so Bridgestone basically focused their entire tyre design to completely suit the design of the Ferrari and Michael's driving style. When it came to Michelin, both Renault and McLaren used that tyre, so it wasn't as if Michelin designed their tyres specifically to suit either of those teams. Now, I understand that tyre talk is not exactly the most exciting thing in the world, but the reason why this is so important is that for 2007, the tyre war ended, Michelin pulled out, and the entire field was now running Bridgestones. Now, this was one of the main reasons why, in the real world, Kimi actually struggled in the first third or so of the season. He spent his entire McLaren career driving with the Michelins, and now he needed to forget everything that he had learned. Ferrari's engineering chief Luca Baldessari described the tyre difference best by saying, "The Michelins were quite a bit different when you approached the corner, and in order to avoid understeer, you had to use the tyre in quite an aggressive way. With the Bridgestones, it's completely the opposite, so if you want to avoid understeer, you need to be gentler on turn-in." This is why to me there is no doubt that Schumi would have had the early season advantage over Räikkönen, and whilst I still think that Kimi would have scored podiums and potentially still snatched a win like he did, I think that early season struggle would have been magnified by the fact that Schumacher would be carrying the team in the early races. However, although I have no doubt that Michael would have the jump on Kimi, I still don't see him taking too many points away from what McLaren actually did. When it comes to races like Monaco, Canada and Indy, the McLaren was just the better car on those tracks. But even in races like Malaysia where the Ferrari was arguably the quicker car, the McLaren drivers made the difference. Although they didn't start from pole, Alonso dominated the race, and even Lewis in only his second ever race made a brilliant start, overtaking both of the Ferraris, and then late on holding off Räikkönen under massive pressure to secure a McLaren 1-2 on a track that Ferrari really should have done better. Now, the question here is, in that early part of the season, how much better would Michael have been against Alonso and Hamilton in those marginal races where both of the cars are able to take the win? I'm thinking of races like Barcelona and Malaysia. That's up to complete interpretation, of course, but again, I could see him winning one, but definitely not both. Michael might have been Michael, but Fernando and even a rookie Lewis Hamilton were not messing about. They were pushing each other to the absolute limit, and they really capitalized during that early part of 2007. So, 7 races into the 17 race season, I think the fight at the front would have actually been closer than it actually was. I think any one of Schumacher, Alonso and Hamilton would have a really good case to be the title leader, and I would actually give the slight edge to Michael as he would have capitalized and scored more of the points that Raikkonen left on the table, with Lewis just behind him and Fernando in third. But quite honestly, I think the gap between the top 3 would be less than 10 or 15 points, and this of course is under the old point system where you got 10 points for a win. Now we get into arguably the most important race of the entire season, Magny-Cours. I've explained Kimi's struggles in the real 2007 season early on, with the tyres and even with the characteristics of the Ferrari. I still think he would have struggled, but unlike Massa, I think Schumi would have took even more points away from Raikkonen, and that's why I have him leading the championship by a whisker at this stage. But it was around this race where Raikkonen finally found a sweet spot with the car and with the tyres, as he adapted and as the team brought suspension upgrades to help Kimi. Even though he didn't qualify on pole in France, this was where he really put it all together in the race by taking the win. Raikkonen's real-life title challenge started with that win in Magny-Cours, and from that race onwards, he only failed to finish on the podium once before winning the title at the end of the season. This race would be critical between Kimi and Michael. The Ferraris were dominant there in 2007, so the win would surely be one of theirs, barring the two of them of course, crashing into each other, which I wouldn't take out of the equation. Magny-Cours would see Kimi back to his absolute best, and now more comfortable with the Ferrari. However, guess which driver has won the French Grand Prix at Magny-Cours, a record equaling 8 times? Michael Schumacher. That's why this race would be the ultimate test, and that's why to me it's a flip of a coin. However, I am saying that although Michael has the pedigree, a Kimi back to his best would take the win in a Ferrari 1-2. And not only would he take the win, but as good as Michael has been in 2007, to me, this is where the momentum at Ferrari would really start to swing towards Kimi. And I think that from here, it would be Kimi who would outperform Michael on a semi-regular basis for the second half of the season. Now, some people might say that if Schumacher dominated Massa in 2006, beating him by 41 points, and since Massa was fairly close to Raikkonen with Kimi outscoring him by only 16 points, then Schumacher would logically have scored more points than Raikkonen and hence won. And with that argument, it actually means that Schumacher would have won the title quite comfortably. But to me, it's not as simple as that. I think the most important thing to put into context is that although Schumacher in 2006 dominated Massa, who was in his first season in Michael's team, it definitely wasn't his strongest season, and it definitely wasn't vintage Schumacher. In 2006, we really did see Michael start to show a few cracks. The spin in Australia, a poor weekend in Malaysia, an incident-filled race in Hungary, and then famously parking his car at Rasgas in Monaco. The 2006 Ferrari was a very good car, but ultimately, Alonso was just the better and more consistent driver. It's not that Schumi was bad by any means, it's just that by his extraordinary standards, fighting for titles year after year for over a decade, even to a superhuman like Michael, that eventually catches up to you both mentally and physically. And in fact, here is what the man himself had to say about where he was mentally and physically by the end of 2006.
Do you think in some ways taking this break could make you a better driver?
It certainly makes me a better driver than I was by the end of 2.5 and 2.6. This no doubt, because already I was kind of empty and tired. But it's to be found out.
That's why if I come back to my predicted swing between Raikkonen and Schumacher, even if it didn't start at Magny-Cours, I think it would have started soon after. Michael in his career never really went up against a world championship caliber teammate. He might have had it easy with Rubens and Felipe, but Kimi, especially in this era, was a different animal. He went to Ferrari to win, and Kimi Räikkönen, still hungry for his first world title, was no one's number 2. That's why when I take all of these factors into account, his performances slipping in 2006, the age and fatigue really kicking in, and then being faced with Lewis and Fernando in a championship-capable car, and then more than anything else, a prime Kimi Räikkönen in the car next to him, improving and getting closer. I just don't see Michael being able to stop Kimi for much longer. In the second half of the season with 9 or 10 races left, this is where, in real life, Lewis started to just drop off a little bit, and it was Fernando and Kimi who really stepped it up to make it a close championship fight. I believe by this point that fatigue factor that he talked about would have really kicked in, and I'm not sure that he would have been able to maintain that level of consistency that was needed. No doubt he would have won more races because there were tracks remaining where the Ferrari was just the better car. Istanbul, Spa and Sao Paulo come to mind. But I think by then, if we look at the second half of the season in isolation, I think Kimi would have outscored Michael in just that second half. So that leaves us with 2 questions. Who wins the teammate battle at Ferrari? And who wins the 2007 World Championship? Even though I think Kimi, as I said, would score more than Michael in the second half of the season, I don't think that he would have outscored Michael by as many points in the second half as he did against Felipe in real life. Michael's level is just higher even if he wasn't at his best by then. And not only do I think that Kimi doesn't do enough to win the title, I don't think he makes up for his early season struggles enough, and I think Schumacher just beats Räikkönen, but with the two of them separated by less than 5 points. But most importantly by the end, with neither, in my opinion, having enough of an advantage over the other to win the 2007 title. So, that leaves the 2 McLaren drivers. Quite honestly, I'm going to leave this to your imaginations because there's an argument for both. In the real world, even though they were level on points, Lewis finished ahead on countback because he got more second places, but it was Alonso who was stronger in the second half of 2007, so does he manage to grab a few more points with Lewis and Kimi not scoring as many because of Michael? It's difficult to say. I think Michael and Kimi, with how close I think they would have been, would take more points away from each other, and therefore either way to me, one of the McLaren drivers in some way, even if they finished level on points again, would come out on top. As far as whom, I'll leave that to you to interpret what Kimi's resurgence and Schumacher being there would do to Lewis and Fernando in the second half of 2007. So, even though I don't think that Schumacher would have been able to secure the 2007 title and become an 8-time world champion, what a season we could have had. Schumacher, Alonso, Räikkönen, and a rookie Lewis Hamilton going head to head for the biggest prize in motorsport. In the end though, there are so many variables with imagining a driver lineup that we've never actually had, and with a driver fighting for a world championship in a season where he didn't even race in. There is so much that can be left to interpretation of what Michael Schumacher could have done at the age of 38, but of course, the beauty of imagining a hypothetical scenario is that there is no right or wrong answer. So let me know in the comments below, what do you think would have happened? And also let me know if you would like me to do another what if video of something that we never got the chance to see in Formula 1. Anyway, there you have it. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, then don't forget to drop a like and also smash that subscribe button to support the channel. That would be greatly appreciated, and I will see you in the next one.